good afternoon, everybody. So today we want to recognize that California State University San Bernardino sits on the territory and ancestral land of the San Manuel Band of Mission Indians. We recognize that every member of the California State University San Bernardino community has benefited and continues to benefit from the use and occupation of this land since the institution's founding in 1965. Consisting with our values of community and diversity, we have a responsibility to acknowledge and make visible the university's relationship to Native people. By offering this land an acknowledgement, we affirm indigenous sovereignty, and we will work to hold California State University San Bernardino more accountable to the needs of American Indian and indigenous people. Thank you, and I will be handing off to Jade.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. Today we have Dr. Tony Gaskew from the University of Pittsburgh. He's a professor of criminal justice and an associate dean of academic affairs. And his most recent book is Stop Trying to Fix Policing: Lessons Learned from the Front Lines of Black Liberation.
All right, good afternoon, everyone there in California. Hopefully everyone's doing well. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna spend maybe 15 minutes trying to take you down a path of police abolition. However, what I'm gonna try to persuade you on is an argument that in order to dismantle American policing, that there will have to be a level of armed resistance. Okay, so I'm going to try to make that compelling argument to you. I'm hoping to get a lot of feedback and discussion based on it. So when we talk about the Black radical tradition, the Black radical tradition is full of collective rituals of revolution, specifically when we regard armed resistance against state oppression. Now, I'm thinking that some of you may voice ethical concerns with using armed resistance. Well, listen, keep in mind that what history has taught us is that violence and nonviolence are simply tactics. You know, pathological pacifism is just as harmful as not doing anything at all. All right. Now, in today's discussion, I'm simply speaking of one chapter in my book, Stop Trying to Fix Policing: Lessons Learned from the Front Lines of Black Liberation. And what I did was I traveled across the country and I simply asked one simple question: how do we get policing out of our lives? And I received a ton of responses. Now, I do want to be clear that I relied heavily on interviews that were conducted from 3 primary organizations that existed in the 1960s as I grew up, born and raised in the 1960s, in the middle of the Black Power movement. So much of what I talk about today came from interviews with individuals who are either incarcerated and or live freely amongst us, but you would have no idea that they belong to one of 3 organizations. The first one was the Black Liberation Army, the BLA. The second organization that fed into the interviews were the Revolutionary Action Movement, or what's called RAM, in the 60s. And finally, the Republic of New Africa, the RNA. So keep in mind, what I voiced today as part of the Black radical tradition is the voice of members of those 3 organizations who are still alive today and centered themselves within the Black Power movement. Okay, now, I'm sure we all sort of understand the Black radical tradition is, 200,000 years old, and it weaves an ontological journey of Black humanity, Black survival, and of course, Black power. It is what's known as the collective consciousness of the Black cultural experience. It echoes out the principles of truth, justice, balance, harmony, order, righteousness, and reciprocity. It is the link to the cycle, the cosmic cycle of resistance. Now, I'm going to make a statement, and I'm going to challenge anyone participating in this discussion to push back on this. There has never been a moment in US history where policing has not been directly involved in anti-Black violence. Let me say that again. There has never been a moment in US history where policing has not been directly involved in anti-Black violence. And of course, from 1661 with the slave codes, to the Fugitive Slave Acts, to the Negro Act, to the Black codes, to Jim Crow, to COINTELPRO, the war on drugs, broken windows, stop and frisk, procedural justice, anything that you want to talk about, every step of the way, policing used violence against the Black diaspora. Okay, so if anyone wants to challenge that at any time, provide evidence, provide empirical data analysis that proves something different. Now, given that fact, we have to understand at some point, there must be pushback. In fact, the Black Liberation Army said clearly, and I quote, "America must learn that Black people are not the eternal sufferers, the universal prisoners, the only ones who can feel pain. That revolutionary violence is, therefore, a tactic of struggle. And it forces every single entity responsible for oppression to realize that they too can bleed, that they too can feel our pain as a collective Black consciousness. That only when this is realized, that justice and equity be the platform of the United States." Now, don't get me wrong. Those of you that are sort of sitting back and going, well, that's not in the spirit of MLK, or that's not in the spirit of Gandhi. Well, let me remind you, in 1964, when MLK was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize, 4 or 5 years before there, MLK gives a speech. And let me tell you what he says. Martin Luther King Jr. says, "Violence exercised in self-defense, which all societies, from the most primitive to the most cultured and civilized, accepts moral and legal self-defense. That the principle of self-defense, even involving weapons and bloodshed," MLK said, "has never been condemned, even by Gandhi, who actually sanctioned it for those who are advocating pure nonviolence. That when Black people use force and self-defense, that it does not forfeit the support of the masses. In fact, it may even win the support of masses and self-respect." Now, keep in mind, many people don't want to discuss this, but MLK was an avid gun owner. He even applied for a concealed weapons permit to protect himself at times. And again, I'm just trying to lay the groundwork that the use of armed resistance, even against the state and even against policing, is not something that's unheard of. Now, again, what data has told us, and I want to be clear about this, what data has told us clearly is that the last 100 years, that policing will not change, that you don't have to conduct another set of data analysis, pre-test, post-test, anything that you want regarding policing, because policing is going to continue to use anti-Black violence at any means. If you want to start with the Lexow Committee in 1894, Du Bois in the Philadelphia Negro, the Chicago Vice Commission in 1911, Donald Henderson's data that he pulled from the Pittsburgh Police Department in 1920, the Chicago Commission on Race Relations in 1922, the Urban League in 1925, the Illinois Crime Surveys both in 1926 and 1927, Ida Reed and her National Urban League, the Wickersham Commission in 1931. We're talking about Frankie Bailey and I believe Alice Green and their work in police corruption in the early 30s. E. Franklin Frazier in the Harlem Riot Report, the Kerner Commission. And if you want to bring this to us, the President's Task Force on 21st Century Policing. Every bit of data that we've ever collected in the United States tells us that policing will continue to use anti-Black violence. Now, bringing this back home just a bit, just keep in mind that I understand that Black people with guns sits at the heart of white fear in America. I realize it disturbs the white-centered imagination that Black people would actually conduct an uprising, an armed uprising against the police. But I'm asking all of you to think outside of the box on this. You have to think outside of the box on this. Keep in mind that at no point is a matter of self-defense given up. In fact, keep this in the back of your mind, that today, as we speak, clearly 8 million Black people in America are gun owners. Another 70% have family members who are gun owners. So I want to keep everyone's attitude positive on this, that it's okay to fight back. And it's okay to fight back even against the state. And surely those of you in California, having at least grown up around the premise of the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense, understand the value of fighting back, even if that is armed resistance today. Now, keep in mind, as I said before, pathological pacifism is weaponized for the state. If you don't fight back, the state even gets more violent regarding this. And very quickly, before I sort of open this up to a discussion, I want every single person to know that case law in the United States, that is the Supreme Court, supports this language. Look up the case laws, District of Columbia versus Heller. The case law, McDonald versus the city of Chicago. The Supreme Court crafts a narrative where they begin to understand that, you know what, that the average everyday person, specifically Black people in America, have a right not just to be afraid of the police, but to actually fight back. And so I sort of want to end on this note. What I'm going to do is I'm going to share a statute with you. And this is a rarity for a lot of people, but I'm going to share this here real quick. Let me see if I can pull this up for everybody. Just give me a second here. And what this is, let's see here. All right. Hopefully everyone can see this. This is the Indiana Code relating to self-defense, or what we commonly know as stand your ground laws. And I want you to pay attention specifically. Now, in the state of Indiana, just like many states that have stand your ground laws, and I'm just going to scroll through this very slowly. Of course, you're justified in using deadly force and that you do not have a duty to retreat, but the Indiana code has some special language in it. I want to take you to subsection B. It defines public servant, and I think most of you know where I'm going on this, that the Indiana code allows a self-defense, even deadly force against public servants. And again, let me show this. This is Indiana Code 35-41-3-2. And I'm going to take us all the way down here to subsection I. And let me read this to you. A person is justified in using reasonable force, and that's including deadly force, against a public servant, that's the police, if the person reasonably believes the force is necessary to protect that person or a third party. So just imagine this. You're on the streets of Minneapolis and you see a police officer kneeling on George Floyd. If this were in Indiana, you could take deadly force action against that police officer to stop that. So in Indiana, the stand your ground law just doesn't protect you from deadly force. You're allowed to protect a third party from being injured. And again, to protect the person or a third person from what the person reasonably believes to be imminent use of unlawful force. It goes on to prevent or terminate the public servant's unlawful entry or attack on a person's dwelling, curtilage, or occupied motor vehicle. So just imagine what a no-knock search warrant would be like if every state had legislation that allowed you and permitted you to legally fight the police back. Just imagine how this works. And again, I'm making sure that this is an academic and a scholarly argument, that the use of self-defense is a universal right. And right now, it seems as only one state takes that to this level. Again, it talks about to prevent or terminate the public servant's unlawful trespass or interference with property lawfully in a person's possession, whether it's in that person's possession or a family member's possession. The idea is that you have a right to protect yourself against the police. Now I'm going to close this discussion. Again, keep in mind that armed resistance is lawful, that armed resistance is spiritual and cosmic in nature, and that armed resistance against the state is not only your duty, but it is your right. Listen, thank all of you very much for a few minutes to try to enlighten you on this, and hopefully we have an extremely lively discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Gaskew. I'm going to start off because what you're saying, I'm all for. I love it, but I'm going to tell you this. In the 70s, I think it was 70s, when the Black Panther Party marched into Washington and they were all fully armed and everything, by the end of the next year, freedom to carry weapons in public were gone. Is that not true?
There is no doubt the state is terrified of armed Black people. And listen, it started in 1865 when 200,000 plus Black armed people left the Civil War, military trained and prepared to fight not for their freedom, Stan, but their liberation. And that's what terrified the state, that they no longer wanted to be associated with the state, that they wanted to be on themselves. But you are correct. But let's keep in mind, when we talk about armed resistance, a lot of people don't have the stomach for that. And some of it is this colonized psyche that we live in. That, and again, I tell this, I write this, I talk about it all the time. I clearly state this and implore this to students all the time. And here's my example. I think, Stan, if most people saw their grandparents dragged by the hair by the police down the street, that person would say to themselves, I wonder what grandma did to deserve that. They wouldn't think of attacking the police officer. They're blaming grandma or grandpa because of what the police are doing. But that's the colonized mindset. Once you're out of the colonized mindset, as the Black Liberation Army said, and I want to be clear on this, the people that I spoke to when I interviewed to write this book, they're not afraid of the police. They grew up in the 60s and they understood you have to fight the state back, because if you don't fight the state back, the state oppresses you more. They look at 2022 and they ask themselves, where's the fight left in people? And don't, hey, the state is powerful in itself, but there's only 1 million police officers. There's only 1 million police officers in the country. That's full and part-time. The minute that 300 million Americans no longer want to play the game, oh, let me just phrase it another way. The minute 45 million Black people no longer want to play this game, game is over.
And so you talk about the colonized mindset, and that let's face it, that's going to be the issue or the problem with the Blacks not taking up arms. Because let's face it, there's a lot of white militias already set up, all ready to go. All they're waiting for is the bell to ring, and they're going to be ready to go. But as far as the colonized mindset for the African Americans or Black folks, it's not happening.
And you know what, Sam? Sometimes we have to look at the events of January the 6th. I just want you to think of that for a second. The events of January the 6th, if the individuals were completely armed, what would have taken place? But listen, first of all, I want to make sure that this stays in a scholarly or in a scholarly space. You know, the politics and the political identities of this country, I think you're 100% on target. That colonized mindset has placed the Black diaspora at a tremendous disadvantage. It's as simple as that. And there is nothing wrong with self-defense. There's nothing wrong with self-defense. All the data tells us now, Stan, that more and more Black people, believe it or not, are arming themselves. More and more Black people are beginning to arm themselves. And it's no secret as to why, as you said, the Black Liberation Army used the verbiage, expropriate. The Black diaspora today has to learn how to expropriate the Second Amendment. They have to learn how to take from the Second Amendment what is required to liberate themselves. And right now, the American policing is using every tactic of violence to continue to oppress the diaspora. And at some point, there's going to be a breaking point.
So I agree with that. And let's talk about different states, because there's a lot of states making laws that make it easier to carry weapons. You know, Arizona's got their open carry, and many states have open carry. And so talk about that open carry and how it affects not only Blacks but all Americans.
Listen, let's be crystal clear. First of all, again, to expropriate the Second Amendment, the Black diaspora has to stop being afraid of stand your ground laws. They have to stop being afraid of open carry laws. Now, Pennsylvania is an open carry state. So let me make this crystal clear. If you walk right outside our campus, literally 5 feet off our campus, you can open carry AK-47s walking down the street without any concealed weapons permit. And that happens in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania very, very often, okay? The Black diaspora has to be able to embrace that as well, is to be able to say, listen, if I want an open carry a weapon, I will open carry a weapon. And again, open carrying a weapon in an open carry state doesn't establish probable cause. And to my criminal justice and legal buffs out there, there are three ways that the police can come into contact with you. One, a consensual encounter, which you can walk away from. Two, reasonable suspicion. An open carry state carrying a strapped AK-47 is not reasonable suspicion to stop and detain someone. So that is a consensual encounter. And the third, of course, is probable cause. If a police officer has probable cause, they're going to place handcuffs on you. There's no need for anything else. Having said that, the Black diaspora has to learn to expropriate and to embrace open carry, stand your ground, and stop being so afraid all the time. This last example a couple of weeks ago, Black people will continue to be killed by police as long as police, and this is the words of the Black Liberation Army, as long as police departments don't understand that they can bleed too. Those are the words of the Black Liberation Army in 1968.
I don't have any questions in the Q&A, but if anyone else has a question, please step up and ask it. So if not, I'll go on, because the passiveness of Blacks has been here forever. The fear of dying because the oppressor is gonna kill you. You cross the line, you're in trouble. How do we change that attitude?
Well, listen, there was no accident, Stan, in 1933 that Carter G. Woodson wrote the phenom, The Miseducation of the Negro. There was no accident that he did that. The idea is to decolonize the masses. And again, education isn't this great, manifest of change. We realize today that a high school dropout who's white has a greater median income than a Black person who graduates from college. So it's not the greatest thing in the world, but what it does is you have to be able to push the agenda of decolonization. If this is looked at scholarly as a white ethno state, you have to be able to push back on that. But I do understand, Stan, how that becomes difficult, because the idea is nobody wants to lose the paycheck that they currently have. Nobody wants to. And we always have to sort of remind ourselves at times, that Frantz Fanon said that a revolutionary must always ask themselves three basic questions, right? The first one is, who am I? The second question is, am I who I think I am? And of course, what pulls to the rear is the third one, am I all I ought to be? And I would challenge the Black diaspora to listen to that third part, am I all I ought to be? And for the most part, I would say no to that. But it's decolonization efforts that do
it. And that's a tough, that's tough. That's tough for an individual to look at himself in the mirror and say I am all I should be, when I know that next door they just got through doing something to my neighbor that I should have stepped up and said something. And you're right. One of the sad things is passiveness, and we tend to be sometimes. They knock on your door. Did you see what happened last night? Well, no, I didn't really see what happened, even though you were standing there watching the whole thing. And so there's some issues with that too.
I see a question that appeared.
Oh, great. So how do you think social media has helped or harmed the movement for change in policing in the US?
I'm going to give the perfect example. Over the last month, there has been an uprise in a critical assessment of how Black Lives Matter movement is spending money. And where's the money? Where's the $80 million that they've amassed? Could you imagine, Stan, if a third of that money was used to buy guns? Could you imagine if a third of that money was used to arm Black Americans? how that would have changed the tempo of this conversation. And again, listen, I do understand. Again, I continue to quote those in the Black Liberation Army or the Revolutionary Action Movement or the Republic of New Africa, because those were the organizations that I grew up around in Chicago in the Black Power movement. Those are the organizations and people that I saw. And I think a lot of people don't realize a lot of the Black Liberation Army went underground. We know that many became political prisoners. Some were killed and murdered by the state and police, but a lot went underground. And they've resurfaced as professionals, as cab drivers. Some are just elderly people right now, but they understand what liberation is about. Social media pushes fear. You know, one of the most heart-wrenching things that I hear, specifically on social media, is when I hear Black parents like myself believing that they have to give their kids that talk about the police, show respect, call them sir, bow down to the police on a traffic stop. And social media spins that. A police officer doesn't deserve any more respect than anyone on the planet. But again, social media spins this mythology of police heroism, you know, that is absolutely ridiculous. But I bring up BLM because, you know, the hundreds of millions of dollars that they've amassed, that hasn't shifted Black liberation 1 inch. And if they would have used that to weaponize the diaspora, again, the conversation is completely different. But that's probably another conversation, Stan.
You're right on that. And now people are looking into where, like you said, where is the money? And the money's not where it belongs. And everyone's looking at the leaders, and it's not looking good. But at the same time, I think one of the things about the organizations that you mentioned in the past, one of the upsides on those organizations is they were willing to die. They were armed.
Listen, and I think you said the key word right there. They were willing. Listen, nobody wants to lay on the altar of sacrifice. Listen, nobody willingly wants to die. That's, you know, but when organizations and people, and Kwame Ture probably said this better than anyone, that you organize the masses. And probably on this Zoom, a lot of students in higher education. And let me just, again, I was blessed enough to see Kwame Ture speak probably a dozen times in my career while he was alive. And arguably, in my humble opinion, one of the greatest revolutionaries ever born. And he would advocate that students out there, that you play a role in this revolution, in this scholarly debate on liberation, that you play a role. You understand what the data says. And I don't have to go into this, and I already went into it with, there's never been a moment in US history where policing has not advocated anti-Black violence. Never been a moment. And if you don't believe me, Black people are more likely to be stopped and frisked. And I'm just wondering, Stan, is there anybody out there who has had a pat down performed on them? And let me just explain something to you. It is a sexual encounter. A police officer gets to put their hands any place they want. And let me just tell you, when you leave that encounter after a police officer has grabbed everything that he can grab, and you walk away humiliated, and the data tells us that 95% of the time, a police officer places their hand specifically on a Black male, no contraband is located. So 95% of the time, a police officer gets to touch a Black male anywhere he wants, anytime that he wants. And that Black male has to continue to live with that. And I bring that up specifically because when we talk about students have a responsibility to spark revolution. You know the data. You know that Black males are more likely to be stopped for a traffic violation, that they're more likely to experience the threat of violence or physical force when they come into contact with the police, that they're more likely to be killed by the police, that they're more likely to be incarcerated, face supervised probation, incarcerated for petty drug offenses, receive life sentences, and more likely to be sentenced to death. Now, Stan, you tell me, who wants to live that kind of life in fear? Nobody does, but you have to stand up to the state in order for that not to occur. Students, your role is to spark revolution. That's what Kwame Ture wrote. It's not to lead the revolution. The masses, the Black diaspora, have to lead the revolution. But as students, your role is to spark it because you have the knowledge to spread. You have the ability to decolonize the masses.
Fantastic. So I have a question here. It says, how should Black people interact with police? We've seen so many instances where Black men and women are murdered for not showing respect or standing their ground. Do Black people have the privilege of treating police officers with the same respect they give us?
Hey, listen, that's a great question. How should Black people interact with the police? Just like they would interact with someone going to the grocery store, just like they would interact going to a sporting event, just like they would interact with somebody who's cutting their lawn. Okay, they show them the same respect that they get. Understand the law, understand how the law protects you from the police. And listen, we probably have students who've completed pre-law classes on this Zoom. Anybody who openly and willingly speaks to the police in a consensual encounter is a fool. That's number one right there, okay? Anytime that you can invoke your right to freely walk away from an incident, do so. But I'm begging you, stop providing police with this mythology of heroism. Treat the police just as you would treat anyone else. Stop the fear. You know, the policing culture, and I know a lot about the policing culture, they live off of fear. And if you understood the culture is extremely fragile. It's as we found out January the 6th, the policing culture wouldn't even fight back, is what I'm trying to tell you. Only one gunshot rang out on January the 6th. I want everyone to think about that. All these tough police officers that you think that are going to protect the Capitol, only one police officer killed someone, and deadly force was authorized throughout the entire thing. That's the policing culture. It's this huge heroism, but it's the mythology of heroism. Interact with the police like you would anyone else. And if you educate your children to provide this overabundant respect for the police, just give me one example where respecting a police officer has saved a Black man. Just give me an example. And if it saved them physically, it tortured them spiritually and mentally later, okay? Because they had to get on their knees and gravel in order to get out of that incident. Listen, that's not mutual respect. And I hope that answers the question. Treat the police officer like you would treat anyone else. No better, no worse.
And I got to add to that question. And it also, respect is earned. And so as a firefighter for 34 years, one of the things we did in the community was we actually went out to the community and treated people like human beings each and every day. And I remember I had a bad day, and one time this guy asked me a question, and my boss told me, he said, "Hey man, you treated that guy like he stole your wallet." And I said, "Oh, I did." And so part of the respect is you not only, you should get it. I think you should get it from the police more before you have to give it even. That's their job. You know, you're paying their salary, and they should respect you for being their boss. So,
You know, Stan, you bring up an interesting point, but slave patrol is the slave patrol. Listen, police didn't respect any black bodies in 1661, and they don't have to respect black bodies now, with the exception of when black bodies start to fight back. And I see a question, if January the 6th would have been blacks or Black Lives Matter folks, do you really think only one shot would have happened on that day? Well, I'll tell you what the data says. If it would have been identified as BLM, nobody would have been shot, because I think half of Black Lives Matter are police informants. Listen, nobody would have been shot. They would have marched with the police. They would have told the police, this is what we're going to do. And again, this is just based on not just anecdotal experience. You have to understand how organizations are created, specifically organizations that are supposed to be anti-racist. Keep in the back of your mind, January the 6th was a snapshot of what the United States is. Those of you who understand critical race theory with Derek Bell and dozens of articles from his novel Faces at the Bottom of the Well to racial realism understand that critical race theory talks about two central components. The first being that systemic racism in the United States of America is permanent. Let me repeat that. Systemic racism in the United States of America is permanent. The second part of that, it is permanent because the United States of America was created on systemic racism. As 19 Black people got off a ship in chains, you can't take that back. It's an impossibility, an impossibility. What you saw on January the 6th, white America doesn't want to spark a revolution. They sit on top of the world here in America. You think they're going to overthrow the state that protects them, don't you? And if you watch the film footage of January the 6th, it becomes evident. The police don't want to hurt them, and they don't really want to hurt the police. Now, there are some that are outliers to that, but for the most part, that wasn't a revolution. That was just to show the police who runs this country, that the police do not run this country, that they are the servants of the masses of white Americans. And the police were put in their place after January the 6th. They understood their role then. If it were Black people, you're talking about a revolution at that point.
there's another
And
question.
there would have been gunfire from and again, I think people, this generation does not understand what revolution is. If you were alive in the 60s, people shot at the police. Let me repeat this. The police shot back, but people shot at the police. You're not gonna see that same fervor today. You're not gonna see that same fervor. Colonization does work. Transgenerational colonization does work. It is an effective strategy to neutralize and exterminate revolutionaries.
I will tell a story about when I was a young man. The police raided 2 Black Panther houses. And the strategy was, let's go down the street from both ends of the street and go in and get them. But the problem was, the Panthers knew the neighborhood and knew the escape routes and knew the neighborhood better than the police knew. And so I'll go in and arrest everybody didn't work. And you're right, there was gunplay, and there was a lot of gunplay. And then the number of arrests were minimal because they knew their neighborhood. And so I saw that, and it was, like I said, it was different times. Because after that happened, everybody in the neighborhood was in the house at 6 o'clock in the evening and everything locked down. And it wasn't the police that were locking us down, it was our parents. The fear of what might happen next. And so it was different times. And I go back to saying that it's going to be tough to have a Black revolution, because Blacks are keeping, like you said, keeping their jobs, keeping their money, and so on. Here's a question for you. It says, could justice system find a way to outlaw black uprisings or twist the law in any sort of way to make sure that Black people cannot gather or buy guns? Laws have already been twisted in cases to give rights impunity and charge Blacks for petty crimes.
Look, it doesn't take too much of a literature view to understand that from the slave codes to the Black codes to Jim Crow, they were all designed to take guns out of the hands of the Black diaspora. And those of you that get sort of caught up on this nostalgic war on drugs, look, the 1960s Black Power movement put guns in the hands of the Black diaspora. To get those guns out of those hands, convicted felons. And we all understand right now, we're talking 2.3 million people incarcerated, 40% of them Black males. The United States of America has continued to create legislation to take guns out of the Black diaspora's hands. And most of that are through felony convictions. It's as simple as that. And I would argue there is no greater ability than to expropriate the Second Amendment. Let me repeat that. There's no greater ability than to expropriate the Second Amendment. And when you lose your right to carry a weapon legally, you've basically told the country you've given up. But specific laws were created to take those guns out of hands. Now, again, this is the part of decolonizing yourself, is to realize I can never allow that to happen. I can never allow and lose my ability to legally carry a weapon. A great question, Cyrus.
And we're seeing it all over. Different states are making it even easier to carry a firearm. And as a Black man, when they make those rules looser, you also have the right to carry a firearm. So take advantage of it.
Stan, I wish instead of solo voter registrations, there were concealed weapons permit registrations at the same time. Same table. You're registering the vote, you're registering to own a concealed weapon. listen, this is the decolonizing thinking that has to take place, okay? And at some point, we're actually gonna bridge that. At some point, we're gonna bridge that.
And then the fear steps in, because and you, like you said, you've seen the history. Once we have 50,000 people with guns, people are afraid.
And again, Stan, the beautiful sunny state of California and its tremendously restrictive gun laws. I think more people in California on death row, more Black men than anybody. Listen to me. Restrictive gun laws have never assisted the Black community. In fact, it allowed the police to weaponize themselves against Black communities because Black communities could no longer fight. Look at California, look at New York. Listen, look at Chicago, where I was born and raised. Anytime there are restrictive gun laws, police love that. They love restrictive gun laws because that means they can go into any Black community anytime they want and carry out violence. And there's no way there's going to be recourse on that. It's impossible because it's impossible to have the gun. So they know with impunity, they can do whatever they want. But you don't see restrictive gun laws in Wyoming or Idaho, listen, or Indiana, the one that I just showed you. You don't see those.
Montana.
That's right, because the message is clear to police. The message is clear. If you come in here, and we also to understand legally the castle doctrine. Your home is your castle. You have no duty to ever retreat in a fight in your home. Some states have just sent that message loud and clear to the police. If you come into my home, I'm going to defend myself. But you're never going to see that in the major urban cities. And let's be careful. It is democratic rule that pushes those restrictive gun laws in those urban areas. Just keep that in the back of your mind. It's the Democratic Party that pushes that agenda to unarm the Black diaspora.
Thank you. There's a question, I think it's been answered many times, but it says, give me your position on gun control in an effort to mitigate mass and or school shootings.
Well, on a personal note, I am an avid gun owner. I work in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. I think everyone has a gun or 10 in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. In fact, just a little quiz material there. Pennsylvania is an open carry state. The only city, now Stan, catch this, the only city in Pennsylvania that you need a concealed weapons permit to open carry a weapon. Stan, you want to take a guess which city that is in Pennsylvania that you need a concealed weapons permit to open carry a weapon?
I would think Philadelphia.
A city of brotherly love with all those Black people. That's an outstanding guess. And again, it's just a sad reality, isn't it? That even in the Commonwealth, they understand the power of a Black person with a gun. And in the city of brotherly love, if you want to carry a open carry weapon that you could 5 feet off my campus, you could carry an AK-47 walking in the middle of the street with a bandera of ammunition on you, and it's legal. But in the city of brotherly love, in order to do that, you have to qualify for a concealed weapons permit. And the county controls who gets a concealed weapon permit. The state controls who has the ability to do that. Now, getting to the question, look, I'm an avid gun owner. I do understand that America is one of the most violent cultures on the planet, but I don't have to convince any of you of that, do I? That in 1865, 4 million Black people were released from chattel enslavement, only to be criminalized through the 13th Amendment. So this is the country. Believe it for what it is. School shootings, part of the culture. And this country will never inhibit gun ownership for white masses. That will never take place. Never. So school shootings are going to continue. And again, I hate to be the bearer of bad news. Police officers know that. Legislators know that. Politicians know that. You know that. Nothing is going to stop school shootings because gun laws will never be restrictive enough to do it.
Professor Gaskew, I could go on for days talking about this stuff. Like I said, it was during my time, like you said, your time. And I remember it clearly, like you said, the revolution, the last poets, and the revolution comes. But we have to close out, and I want to thank you for all your, information overload. So thank you for joining us today, and hopefully we can get you back and talk some more, because it was for me, I was in heaven. So thank you.
It's been a pleasure. Hopefully this conversation continues outside of this Zoom. Thank you very much, Stan, and everyone for allowing me an opportunity to speak.
Thank you. Thank you so much.